These papers.
Charles Carroll, many thanks. This is Radio 4, time for Sunday with William Crawley.
Thank you very much. Good morning. On this week's Sunday.
In general, I think two words come to mind. One, shocked, and the other, disappointed.
The reaction of one abuse survivor to the Charity Commission's report into Britain's Jehovah's Witnesses. But why did it take 9 years for that investigation to be completed?
In 2014, the Charity Commission opened an investigation into Britain's Jehovah's Witnesses and how they handled child protection. After no less than 9 years of work, their report was finally published last week. A delay, we're told, that's in part the result of legal actions brought by the Jehovah's Witnesses, which sought to challenge some of the regulators' decisions and orders. The Commission also seems to have struggled at times to determine who exactly directs safeguarding policy for Britain's Jehovah's Witnesses. The charity they were investigating, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Britain, is the official name for the governing body of the Jehovah's Witnesses here, but the Charity Commission says it now believes this body is no longer in charge of safeguarding. As a result of a recent merger within the Jehovah's Witnesses movement, it appears that the Kingdom Hall Trust is now responsible for child protection policies. If this all sounds confusing, you're not alone. The report is also critical of the Watchtower trustees for being, and I quote, not as straightforward or transparent as they should have been in relation to child safeguarding responsibilities. For their part, the Jehovah's Witnesses maintain that they sought to assist the inquiry throughout. John Viney, a former elder in the Jehovah's Witnesses and an abuse survivor himself, gave us his reaction to the report.
In general, I think two words come to mind. One, shocked, and the other, disappointed. Shocked because to find out the level of non-cooperation over the last 9 years that Jehovah's Witnesses have been investigated. And when you read the report outlines all the difficulties that the Charity Commission had, all of the court cases that Jehovah's Witnesses used to stop the Charity Commission from looking into it. And disappointed, the other word, because when you see all the evidence of the lack of cooperation, they've been very diplomatic in saying that Jehovah's Witnesses have not been as straightforward and as transparent as they should have been. They know that they've been led a merry dance, but have held up short of condemning them for that.
The Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Britain, the Jehovah's Witnesses, challenge some of what you're saying and some of what this report says, because they say they have cooperated and they've given, in response to us, they've given us dates over time when they've been complimented by the Charity Commission for their cooperation. So they're rather bemused by that criticism.
Well, the evidence is that it took 9 years just to find out who is it that you're saying are responsible for the child protection policies so we can just monitor them. But I think we also have to be aware that Jehovah's Witnesses have already told us in advance on the June the 1st, 1960 Watchtower magazine, which is their magazine, that when someone is perceived to be attacking their organisation, they can actually misdirect, mislead, put spin on or deflect the truth. And when you look at the evidence, and the evidence is very clear of 9 years of misleading, that they've actually followed through on that theocratic warfare.
Again, the Jehovah's Witnesses point out that expert evidence has already concluded, and I quote from them, that the child protection policy of Jehovah's Witnesses comply fully with the statutory requirements that apply and offers clear guidance as to the circumstances which would give rise to making a report to the civil authorities. And they also point out that they will make a report to the civil authorities on the basis of only one person's allegation, not two, not more, but just one person's allegation.
Well, let's hope they do that. I'm here just to raise the questions that over the last 9 or 10 years since I went down to London and poured out my heart to the Charity Commission and told them my experience and that of my family and that of many others, All we wanted was children to be protected within Jehovah's Witnesses. If they say they are now going to do that, then that's great.
John, just remind our audience, would you, of what happened to you and to your daughter and how your situation was dealt with by the Jehovah's Witnesses, would you?
Yes, well, I was abused myself, but I didn't really come out with that until only a few years ago. But sadly, my daughter also was abused by an elder. At the time, and even now, you are dissuaded from reporting things to the police. It was seen as maybe bringing reproach on Jehovah's name. So I repeat, if they say they're going to work with the Charity Commission now, even though it's taken 9 years, let's hope they do.
I understand, everyone will understand that there's a difference between a policy and what happens in practice, no matter what the organisation is, John. But would you accept, in the words of the Jehovah's Witnesses themselves, that their policy does say, it does provide that elders are directed to comply with all mandatory reporting obligations, and that in jurisdictions without a mandatory reporting law, like England and Wales, their elders are directed to report an allegation to the statutory authorities whenever it appears, any time it appears, that a child might be at risk?
I would absolutely say that that does not happen and will not happen. The Charity Commission's own statement says, for instance, that the policy that elders had lacked clarity and created confusion for elders that formed a potential risk for beneficiaries. So I don't believe over the years that the child protection policies have been understandable and workable. And again, I will say that if Jehovah's Witnesses are saying that they are going to report every matter to the authorities, well, that's good news. I'm afraid I don't think they will do that unless we do get mandatory reporting introduced.
John Viney, let's try to set this new report in the wider context of religious organisations facing scrutiny over safeguarding with Kathleen Hallisey, a senior associate at the law firm Hugh James.
I think it's positive after all these years of a very long inquiry into the Jehovah's Witnesses that the report has finally been released. I think that what's been documented in the report does raise some concerns about how they as an organization responded to the Charity Commission's inquiry and really what the charity is trying to achieve.
What concerns you most?
I'm concerned about the litigation that was involved in what was an inquiry really to improve safeguarding and ultimately to protect children.
Is that common that religious organisations would mount legal challenges to investigations?
It's not uncommon. I can't speak generally in relation to the Charity Commission, but I can speak in relation to the work that I do, which is pursuing compensation claims against religious organizations for abuse that's been suffered by children who are within the organization, and certainly are organizations that are known to be very litigious in that process. The Jehovah's Witnesses can be, the Catholic Church can also be extremely litigious. So I wouldn't want to finger point the Jehovah's Witnesses particularly. There are other religious organizations that can also be incredibly litigious.
It is their right, of course, isn't it, to properly defend their claims?
Absolutely. But I think there are certainly cases where it's very obvious that abuse has taken place and that they are responsible for the abuse. And in those circumstances, I don't think that it's correct to defend the claim. I think the proper approach to that is to hold your hands up and acknowledge what's happened, apologize, and offer fair compensation to the victim and survivor.
From your experience, Kathleen, when it comes to questions of mandatory reporting and religious organisations, how do you get religious organisations to come into line with that kind of safeguarding policy?
I think the way to do that is for mandatory reporting laws to encompass everybody. So every person in society who knows or suspects abuse is taking place to report it. And that way it's not specific to a religious organization. Because undoubtedly, if the mandatory reporting laws, which people are obviously hoping for, including myself, limit it to certain religious organizations and other institutions, it will be fought tooth and nail. And there will be arguments about, oh, well, we don't sponsor child-based activities, etc. And so if you have a law that encompasses everybody in society with a sanction attached for failing to report, I think it's important to remember there needs to be a sanction attached. Then that's how you would encompass religious organizations.
As you know, a public consultation is underway in the UK around these questions, and it ends on Monday, tomorrow. It'll be interesting to see which religious organisations contribute to that public consultation and some of the issues that they may raise around extending mandatory reporting requirements to their organisations, because some people think what we're going to end up with in the UK is a rule that applies to those who professionally work with children rather than that universal rule you're proposing.
Yeah, and I really don't think that that's going to go far enough, because the situation we are in at this point in time, given the history of institutional levels of child sexual abuse, and it's not just sexual abuse we're talking about, I think we should be clear about that, also abuse generally of children and children who have unfortunately died at the hands of their carers. We're really in a situation now where we need very strict and stringent mandatory reporting laws.
Kathleen Hallisey there, and that's it for this week's Sunday. Emily Buchanan will be here next week. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.